Jonathan Roumie walked through the massive glass doors of Kenneth Copeland Ministries with the quiet confidence of a man carrying divine truth. The same presence that had captivated millions portraying Jesus in The Chosen now filled the opulent corridors of America's most controversial prosperity empire. Gold-plated fixtures gleamed under crystal chandeliers as his footsteps echoed toward the main sanctuary, where 15,000 seats awaited what Copeland had promised would be a friendly discussion about faith in Hollywood. But this wasn't going to be friendly. This wasn't even going to be a discussion. This was going to be the most explosive confrontation in religious television history. Kenneth Copeland stood center stage in his signature $3,000 custom suit, his weathered face stretched into that familiar predatory grin that had convinced millions to empty their bank accounts for decades. His private jet fleet worth $300 million sat gleaming on the runway outside, a monument to the prosperity gospel empire he'd built on the backs of desperate believers. The 88-year-old televangelist adjusted his diamond-studded tie clip, completely unaware that the young actor walking toward him possessed information that would destroy everything he'd spent 60 years building. What the packed auditorium didn't know, what the millions watching live around the world couldn't possibly imagine, was that Jonathan hadn't come here to discuss theology or defend his portrayal of Jesus. He had come to expose the most shocking secret in modern Christianity. Something so devastating that Kenneth Copeland had murdered to keep it hidden. Something that proved the prosperity gospel wasn't just false teaching, it was a generational conspiracy involving some of the most powerful religious figures in America. Something that connected Copeland to a 50-year cover-up of evidence that would change how the world viewed televangelism forever. The audience erupted in thunderous applause as Jonathan took his seat across from the man who had no idea his reign of spiritual terror was about to end. Copeland's eyes gleamed with the confidence of a predator who believed he was about to devour his prey on live television. He had spent 3 weeks preparing with his legal team and public relations experts, crafting the perfect strategy to humiliate the Hollywood actor who dared portray Jesus as poor. He had no idea that Jonathan Roumie had spent the last 5 years gathering evidence of crimes that would send shockwaves through every church in America. But what Kenneth Copeland was about to discover, what would turn his moment of anticipated triumph into the darkest nightmare of his life, was that Jonathan hadn't just discovered his secret. He had discovered the secret. The one thing that connected every major prosperity preacher in America to a conspiracy so massive, so evil, that it would expose the entire movement as something far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. Something that proved Kenneth Copeland wasn't just a false teacher. He was a cold-blooded killer who had spent decades eliminating anyone who threatened to expose the truth about where prosperity gospel really came from and why it was designed to destroy the faith of millions. Kenneth Copeland's voice boomed through the sanctuary with the practiced authority of a man who had commanded audiences for 6 decades. His trademark smile stretched wide as he leaned forward, diamond rings catching the studio lights like weapons of spiritual warfare. "Jonathan," he began, his Texas drawl dripping with condescension, "I've got to tell you, son, your little Jesus show is more dangerous than Hollywood pornography." The audience murmured in shocked agreement, hanging on every word from their prosperity prophet. "You're showing our Savior as some homeless carpenter beggar, when Scripture clearly teaches he was the wealthiest man who ever lived. King of Kings means king of wealth, boy. You're leading God's people into poverty theology and robbing them of their divine inheritance of abundance." Copeland's voice rose to that familiar screaming pitch that had terrified congregations into emptying their wallets for decades. "Do you know what you're doing to these precious people? You're making them ashamed of God's blessings. You're teaching them that poverty is holiness when God wants to make every believer a millionaire." The crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause, their faces glowing with prosperity gospel fervor. This was exactly what they had come to hear. Their spiritual father destroying the Hollywood elite who dared question their theology of wealth. But Jonathan Roumie remained perfectly motionless in his chair, studying Kenneth Copeland with eyes that held a knowledge so dangerous it could topple kingdoms. His silence was unnatural, almost supernatural, as if he were listening to a voice the rest of the auditorium couldn't hear. When the applause finally died down, when Copeland's breathing returned to normal, when the sanctuary fell into expectant silence, Jonathan spoke with a calm that cut through the air like a blade of divine judgment. "Kenneth," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from eternity itself. "Before we discuss theology, before we talk about wealth or poverty, there's something your congregation deserves to know about you. Something you've spent 60 years and $500 million to keep buried in unmarked graves." The color began to drain from Copeland's weathered face as the audience leaned forward, sensing a shift in the spiritual atmosphere of the room. "I didn't come here tonight to debate prosperity gospel with you. I didn't come here to defend a television show." Jonathan's eyes locked onto Copeland's with laser intensity. "I came here to ask you about what really happened to Pastor David Richardson in 1963. The name hit the auditorium like a nuclear explosion. Kenneth Copeland's face went from confident tan to ashen gray in a matter of seconds, his trademark smile evaporating as if it had never existed. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and for the first time in 6 decades of ministry, the master manipulator sat completely speechless. The audience gasped collectively, sensing they were witnessing something historic, something that would be talked about for generations. David Richardson, a name that had been whispered in secret for 60 years. A name that Kenneth Copeland had spent more money than most countries' GDP to erase from history. Jonathan turned toward the camera, his presence filling every screen around the world with an authority that seemed to transcend human understanding. "If you believe that truth matters more than religious theater," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word, "if you're ready to see behind the golden curtain of America's most protected prosperity empire, hit that like button right now and drop a flame emoji in the comments. Because what you're about to discover will shatter every lie you've ever been told about the prosperity gospel movement. What you're going to learn in the next few minutes will prove that Kenneth Copeland isn't just a false teacher. He's been covering up the greatest crime in modern Christianity for 60 years. His gaze pierced through the camera lens as if he could see into the soul of every viewer. Stay with me for every single second because this revelation will change how you see religious authority forever. And whatever you do, don't look away, because the most shocking part of this story is still coming." Kenneth Copeland forced his trademark smile back into place, though it looked like a mask that no longer fit. He let out a nervous chuckle, shaking his head as if dealing with a delusional child. "Jonathan, I don't know what Hollywood gossip you've been listening to, but David Richardson was a troubled young man who made poor choices back in the day. These precious people came here to be inspired, not to listen to ancient conspiracy theories." His voice carried that honey-sweet tone that had made him millions. "Look at this ministry, 43,000 members, broadcasts in 134 countries. If God didn't approve, why would he bless us with such incredible success?" The audience murmured agreement, clapping softly, desperate to believe their prosperity prophet was still worthy of their trust. But Jonathan hadn't moved during Copeland's entire performance. He sat perfectly still, watching with those penetrating eyes, waiting with supernatural patience. When the applause died, Jonathan spoke with a voice that cut like divine judgment. "Incredible success," Jonathan repeated slowly, his words hanging like an indictment. 43,000 members. 134 countries. Tell me, Kenneth, how much of that success was built on David Richardson's silence? How much of your empire stands on his grave?" The color drained from Copeland's face so quickly it was visible to every camera. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. The audience leaned forward, sensing they were witnessing the unraveling of everything they thought they knew. Jonathan's eyes never left Copeland's terrified face. "Because everyone watching needs to understand something Kenneth doesn't want you to know. Prosperity theology isn't just false teaching. It's a carefully constructed lie built on murder and systematic elimination of anyone who threatens to expose the truth." His presence filled the screen with divine authority. David Richardson wasn't just a troubled young man, Kenneth. He was your business partner, your closest friend, and the only person alive who knew where prosperity gospel really came from and why it was designed to destroy the faith of millions. Jonathan turned to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper, forcing millions to lean closer. "But before I tell you what really happened to David Richardson on that dark night in 1963, Before I reveal the documents proving Kenneth Copeland is guilty of crimes that would shock the world, you need to understand how many powerful people have died to keep this secret. Don't go anywhere, because what comes next will expose the real foundation of prosperity gospel. And the truth is more horrifying than anything you could imagine. The auditorium fell into a crushing silence that seemed to last forever. Kenneth Copeland sat frozen, his empire crumbling in real time as sweat poured down his face despite the air conditioning. But desperation makes dangerous men even more dangerous. Suddenly, Copeland shot to his feet, his voice exploding through the sanctuary with the rage of a cornered predator. "Enough!" he screamed, his face twisted with fury that his television audience had never witnessed. "You want to talk about David Richardson? That boy was mentally unstable, addicted to drugs, spreading lies about God's anointed servants." His voice rose to that characteristic shriek that had terrified congregations for decades. "He came to us broken and we tried to help him, but some people choose darkness over light. Some people can't handle the truth of God's abundance." The audience gasped at the venom in his words. This wasn't the gentle prosperity preacher they knew from television. This was a man fighting for his survival, willing to destroy a dead man's memory to save himself. "And you," Copeland continued, pointing a shaking finger at Jonathan, "you sit there playing Jesus on some Hollywood show, thinking that gives you the right to attack a ministry that's blessed millions. Do you know how many lives we've changed? How many families we've lifted out of poverty with the message of divine prosperity?" But Jonathan remained seated, unmoved by Copeland's volcanic outburst. His calm in the face of such rage was unsettling, almost supernatural. When Copeland finally paused for breath, Jonathan spoke in a voice so quiet it cut through the chaos like divine whisper. "Kenneth," he said, and somehow that single word carried more authority than all of Copeland's screaming. "David Richardson kept detailed records. Every meeting, every conversation, every threat you made against him." Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Copeland's eyes widened in terror as if he were seeing his own death warrant. "Would you like me to read his final letter to this audience? The one he wrote 3 days before his convenient car accident? The one where he documented your confession about the Tulsa incident?" Copeland's hands began shaking violently. "You can't. Those records were destroyed. You have no right." But Jonathan's calm was devastating. "He gave me the right, Kenneth. Before David Richardson died, he made sure the truth would eventually come to light. He wanted the world to know what really happened in that warehouse in 1962 and why prosperity gospel was never about God's blessings." Jonathan stood slowly, his presence filling the stage with an authority that seemed to come from heaven itself. "Hurricane Harvey, Kenneth. August 2017. Your city was drowning, people desperate for shelter, and you locked the doors of your massive church compound. While families died in floodwaters, you were protecting your gold-plated fixtures and worried about water damage to your private jet hangar." The audience erupted in shocked murmurs. "That's not the Jesus I portray. That's not the God that David Richardson believed in. That's the God of greed wearing the mask of divine authority." Copeland opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in 60 years of ministry, the master manipulator had no lies left to tell. Jonathan turned to the camera one final time. "What you're witnessing is what happens when truth confronts decades of deception, when authentic faith exposes spiritual fraud. But the most shocking revelation is still coming. What I'm about to show you will prove that Kenneth Copeland isn't just guilty of murder. He's been part of a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of religious and political power in America. Don't look away, because the next few minutes will change everything you thought you knew about who really controls the prosperity gospel movement." The silence in the auditorium was deafening. Kenneth Copeland sat motionless, his face ashen, staring at the manila envelope in Jonathan's hands like it contained his own death sentence. But what the audience didn't know, what even Copeland himself was about to discover, was that Jonathan had saved the most earth-shattering revelation for last. Something so explosive it wouldn't just destroy Copeland's ministry, but would expose the darkest conspiracy in American religious history. Jonathan opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, as Copeland's breathing became shallow and panicked. There's something else in David Richardson's final letter, Kenneth. Something he discovered in those last 3 days that terrified him so much he tried to flee the country. Jonathan pulled out a faded photograph and held it up. Copeland's eyes went wide with absolute terror, his face turning gray as if all blood had drained from his body. This photograph was taken in November 1962, outside a warehouse in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Jonathan's voice grew stronger with each devastating word. It shows you, Kenneth Copeland, standing next to 3 other men. Men who would become the most powerful prosperity preachers in American history. The auditorium began to buzz with confused whispers as people strained to understand what they were witnessing. But here's what David Richardson discovered that got him killed, Jonathan continued, his voice carrying the weight of divine judgment. Those 3 men weren't pastors, Kenneth. They were CIA operatives. And that warehouse wasn't a prayer meeting. It was a psychological warfare training facility. The auditorium exploded. People screamed, gasped, some fell back in their chairs in complete shock. The cameras captured every moment as the most stunning revelation in religious television history unfolded before millions of viewers. Copeland's mouth moved wordlessly, his hands gripping his chair as if the world was spinning out of control beneath him. The prosperity gospel was never a religious movement, Kenneth. Jonathan's voice cut through the chaos like a sword of truth. It was a government psychological operation designed to pacify and control the American Christian population. Keep them focused on money instead of justice. Make them blame themselves for poverty instead of questioning the system. Turn churches into collection agencies for the ruling elite. The words hit like nuclear bombs, each revelation more devastating than the last. Project Shepherd, they called it, launched in 1962 during the height of the Cold War. The goal was simple: create false religious leaders who would redirect Christian energy away from social justice and toward personal wealth accumulation. Make believers complicit in their own oppression by convincing them that God wanted them rich while ensuring they stayed poor. Copeland tried to stand but collapsed back into his chair, his entire world disintegrating in real time. Your father didn't start his ministry through divine calling, Kenneth. He was recruited, trained, and funded by intelligence operatives who needed a charismatic frontman for their psychological warfare program. David Richardson was the whistleblower who tried to expose the whole operation. Jonathan held up another document, his voice trembling with righteous fury. This is David's final report to the Senate Intelligence Committee. He had names, dates, bank records proving that every major prosperity preacher received government funding. He was going to testify that the entire movement was designed to spiritually lobotomize American Christians. The audience was in complete pandemonium. People crying, shouting, some attempting to storm the stage. This wasn't just spiritual fraud anymore. This was treason on a scale that defied imagination. 3 days before his testimony, David Richardson died in that convenient car accident. His evidence disappeared. The investigation was buried. And Kenneth Copeland became the public face of the most successful psychological operation in American history. Jonathan stood now, his presence commanding absolute attention from every camera, every eye in the auditorium. For 60 years, Kenneth, you've been destroying American Christianity from within, turning believers into consumers, churches into businesses, faith into greed. All while serving masters who wanted to see the church neutered and powerless. His voice rose to a crescendo that seemed to shake the foundations of false religion itself. This is why Jesus threw the money changers out of the temple. This is why the gospel has always been about justice for the poor, not prosperity for the wealthy. This is why authentic faith threatens political power, and why they had to create a counterfeit gospel to neutralize it. The auditorium was in complete chaos. People screaming, weeping, some standing and pointing accusingly at Copeland while others sat in stunned silence, trying to process the earth-shattering truth they had just witnessed. Kenneth Copeland sat hunched in his chair like a broken man, his 60-year empire of lies crumbling in real time. But desperation makes dangerous men even more dangerous, and Copeland wasn't finished fighting for his survival. Suddenly, Copeland found his voice, though it came out as a strangled roar of fury and panic. "You think destroying me changes anything?" he screamed, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "There are hundreds of us. The operation is bigger than any one man. They'll replace me before my body is cold." His eyes were wild now, the mask of gentle prosperity preaching completely stripped away to reveal something monstrous underneath. "People want to buy God's favor, Jonathan. They want the easy path. You're fighting human nature itself, and the machine is too powerful. You'll lose." But Jonathan smiled, not with malice, but with the absolute certainty of a man who knew divine truth. "You're right about one thing, Kenneth. I can't stop the entire operation alone." He stepped closer, and Copeland instinctively backed away in terror. "But I'm not fighting this battle by myself." The audience leaned forward as Jonathan's voice grew powerful with prophetic authority. "For the last 8 years, while you built your lies, I've been building something else. A network of authentic believers, real pastors, genuine ministries that serve instead of exploit. Former CIA operatives who found genuine faith and want to expose Project Shepherd. Senate investigators who never forgot David Richardson's sacrifice." His eyes locked on Copeland's terrified face. "The reason your numbers are dropping, Kenneth, the reason young people are leaving prosperity churches, it's not because they're losing faith. It's because they're finding authentic faith. They're discovering what Jesus actually taught before your psychological operation corrupted it." The crowd erupted in understanding and hope, but Jonathan wasn't finished. David Richardson didn't just leave evidence, Kenneth. He left an inheritance. $3 million in a secret account, money he saved to expose the truth when the time was right. Copeland staggered backward as if physically struck. "Money I've spent creating the Richardson Foundation. Free deprogramming services for prosperity gospel victims. Legal aid for families destroyed by false teaching. Emergency funds for people who gave their last dollar to government-funded false prophets." Jonathan's voice rose with righteous power. "But here's what will destroy you more than any exposure, Kenneth. David's evidence didn't just prove your CIA connections. It proved which politicians, which media executives, which business leaders are part of Project Shepherd. We have 8 years of additional evidence. Bank records, recorded conversations, documented meetings between prosperity preachers and intelligence operatives." The auditorium pulsed with revolutionary energy as Jonathan turned to the camera. "This isn't just about exposing Kenneth Copeland anymore. This is about dismantling the entire psychological operation that's been poisoning American Christianity for 60 years. We're releasing everything. Every name, every connection, every dollar of government funding that created the prosperity gospel industrial complex." Copeland collapsed completely, understanding that his empire wasn't just exposed but that the entire system was being systematically replaced by the very people it had tried to control. Jonathan's voice carried divine authority as he delivered the final blow. "The age of government-controlled Christianity is ending, Kenneth. The age of authentic faith has begun. Project Shepherd is over, and we're making sure the world knows exactly how they tried to steal the gospel from the people." The auditorium pulsed with revolutionary energy that seemed to transcend the physical realm itself. Kenneth Copeland sat broken and defeated, his 60-year reign of spiritual terror finally ended. But Jonathan Roumie stood center stage with the authority of a prophet, commanding the attention of millions worldwide who were witnessing the birth of a new era in American Christianity. "This moment is bigger than Kenneth Copeland," Jonathan declared, his voice carrying divine power that seemed to shake the foundations of false religion. "This is about reclaiming the gospel from a government operation that spent 60 years poisoning the well of faith. For too long, Christians have been told that God's love has a price tag, that poverty equals spiritual failure, that wealth equals divine approval. Tonight, we expose that lie forever and restore the revolutionary power of authentic Christianity." The crowd roared with understanding, but Jonathan commanded silence with a raised hand, his gaze penetrating every camera lens. "If you've ever sent your rent money to prosperity preachers promising miraculous returns, if you felt ashamed of struggling financially while watching these false prophets live in luxury, If you've wondered why the gospel of Jesus Christ became a business instead of a revolution for justice, this message is for you. Jonathan's voice rose with prophetic fire that seemed to come from heaven itself. The Richardson Foundation isn't just exposing prosperity gospel fraud. We're documenting every connection between government operatives and religious leaders. We're providing free legal aid to families destroyed by Project Shepherd. We're creating authentic churches that serve the poor instead of exploiting them. We're training real pastors who understand that the gospel threatens political power precisely because it demands justice. The energy in the auditorium was explosive as Jonathan delivered his final commission to millions of viewers. Drop revolution in the comments if you're ready to join the movement that's taking back Christianity from government psychological operations. Subscribe if you want to receive updates as we release the classified documents that prove how deep this conspiracy goes. Share this video if you believe David Richardson's sacrifice should expose every false prophet in America. His voice reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of religious and political power. The age of government-controlled prosperity gospel is ending tonight. The age of authentic, revolutionary Christianity is beginning. We're not just exposing Kenneth Copeland. We're liberating the American church from 60 years of psychological warfare. David Richardson's evidence will not be buried again. His revolution starts now, and every believer who chooses truth over comfortable lies becomes part of God's resistance movement. Jonathan turned toward the camera one final time, his presence filling every screen with divine authority. This is just the beginning. The complete evidence will be released over the next 30 days. Every name, every bank record, every classified document that proves how they tried to steal the gospel from the people. Join us, because the real gospel was never for sale, and we're going to make sure the world knows it. The screen faded to the Richardson Foundation logo. Where truth sets faith free, subscribe for the revolution against religious psychological warfare.